Great. Welcome to everyone to this Board Boost kickoff session. Most of you are joining us online, and welcome to everybody in today's live session as well. So if you're watching the recording, you can pause the screen for a second and just hear what some previous participants have said about this program previously. My name is Mita. I'm a former Young Trustee, Young Chair, and I now work as the co-CEO of the Young Trustees Movement, and really excited to be leading this Board Boost cohort for 2024. So what will we be covering in today's session? We'll be covering why the movement exists and why Board Boost exists, what the 6-month journey looks like on Board Boost and beyond, how to make the most of the session of Board Boost, deadlines, bursaries, and logistics, how you can get involved with the session next year, and answering any specific questions you have as well. Now, if you're not going to actually join Board Boost this year, or if it doesn't work out, hopefully there's still some helpful learnings within this webinar that you can apply to supporting your trustees, or if you're a young person on a board yourself. So why does the movement exist, first of all? And why does Board Boost exist? Well, when 1 in 12 trustees are called either John or David, while less than 3% of trustees are under the age of 30, it's no secret that board diversity is an issue, and it's a real issue for the core functioning of governance to navigate uncertainty, reflect the interests of the community, and future-proof decision making. And the reason why we exist is because there is a lack of a demographical representation of people under the age of 30. But what we really say is we're here for intergenerational governance and to supporting meaningful diversity of perspectives that really enable boards to thrive and support their charity meet their mission. And so in terms of the problems that exist, there's a problem within recruitment. Often it's matching the supply and demand of trustees, structural barriers, and then retention and inclusion as well. In a study conducted by Ecclesiastical, 23% of young people said that they felt the reason why they left was because they felt like an outsider. And 22% said the reason why they left was because they felt like their input was no longer valued. So some strong feelings, for example, coming around retention around inclusion and belonging. And so this is what has created our program Board Boost. The cohort we're running this year is for existing young people on a board, or shadow trustees on a board, or committee members who are part of a board. We will be next year potentially running a matching and placing program. And the idea of Board Boost is that it is a 6-month accelerator program that encompasses everything young people need to thrive in governance and for their wider boards to create inclusive, accessible places. And this program has been developed based on what boards who have championed young people to thrive on boards done really well, as well as common barriers and hurdles that they will face. And so we accelerate the process of supporting to dismantle those barriers and to enable the most efficient learning experience, and meaningful and joyful one as well. And we also held a number of consultations with aspiring current and former young trustees across the country, as well as CEOs and wider trustee boards, to understand like what is it that people need for this to be supported to thrive in these spaces. And this program also is reflective of social justice and inclusion practices, such as a theory called the 4 Eyes of Oppression. And it is also based on a successful program that has been working for several years from Oxford hubs, which we have adapted and piloted and updated based on our feedback. So what does this 6-month program look like? Well, it starts with having a cohort of young trustees, up to 15 participants in this space, where they're trained in core governance skills. They're given a space for peer learning and support with each other, and then they're given an opportunity to lead on a governance project to consolidate their skills. So the idea is by the end of this 6 months, they would have contributed and led on a project within the board by the end of that 6 months. And that can be something like updating the reserves policy to supporting with a recruitment pack, whatever the need and interest is there from both the young person and the wider board themselves. Then there's a whole board practice, a whole board approach, where we support the wider board to create supportive board cultures. We support them to develop inclusive ways of working. And we support them to not only do that, but embed these ways of working in everything that they do. In a way that is time sensitive, that acknowledges that often the board is very time poor. And then we support them with a mentor on their board. Again, we adapt how much they work with their board based on the organization and the time commitment that they have. And this encompasses, as you'll see, like working holistically with different stakeholders, because what from the consultations, what we have strongly heard is for impact to be made, it needs to be made holistically like that. And it works on both the hard skills of governance as well as the softer skills, with things like knowing your worth and those things. And I'll go into detail in some of those more things in a moment. But what does this not solve? So there are some issues that are much bigger than us and might require much bigger resource. Or things that this program won't specifically solve. So there are some people who just can't afford to volunteer their time, who are digitally excluded. So sorry, on that first point, I'll go on to the time commitment required for this program later. Those who are digitally excluded, a lot of this program works online, and those who with power who actively don't want to change. So while we can support the board to nudge them into behaviors to support inclusive practices, ultimately if there isn't buy-in and if there is particularly bad actors within the boardroom, we can't magically solve those things. And some solutions around some of these things are paid full-time employment, which is, I'm saying these things because a lot of these things are kind of out of the realms of our control. If you're a tiny charity already struggling with resources, the reason why we have this slide is to just really acknowledge the place that we sit in and what we can and we can't solve within this program. So these are some wider solutions that we're asking and working with the sector and asking for funders to support us with to enable some of these solutions. So having paid full-time employment to support those who are most excluded to really thrive in these boards and have the time to review things like board papers, to have potentially paid placements that allow for people to and allow for relationship building. If you do have resources for these, you can actually, it is legal to pay trustees, and paid low commitment places. So for instance, shadowing places. And there's some great work done by somebody called Ambereen Shah, who has shared her learnings of how to create shadow placements to enable greater participation. And then we're also doing some work trying to like nudge people who have power to ensure that they that they can change in those ways as well. So what does this 6-month journey and beyond entail? Well, it runs from October to May, and the core training happens between November and April. This is September where we're planning this kickoff, which we're sending to you all. In October, there is induction with you all to make sure that those who are signed up to the program will be running an inclusion assessment to see how we can make this program inclusive to you and any adjustments that we can make to support you. Then in November, we have our first session kickoff, where we'll do 3 months of training on kind of the core governance skills. And then the following 3 months, we'll be supporting the young people to deliver their governance project. And underneath this as well, we will also have support for that cohort of young people. And the way we have designed this program is that it is wrapped around your trustee skills as a whole. Because often when you're time poor, you might want to use some of our support sessions to prepare, for instance, a board meeting, or to share some board papers that you found really tricky. And obviously we'll work with people in the induction to think about, like, what does sharing information look like in a way that is sensitive to the organization. But all that kind of support to really actively thrive in the role. So it's very much learning by doing, and supporting in the moment with whatever comes up. And the commitment to this is bi-weekly on Wednesdays between 6 and 8 p.m. The support sessions are optional, but very much encouraged. And the key once a month sessions are the training and the governance project sessions. Then the work that we do with the whole board, we ask the board to reserve a minimum of 10 minutes in their agenda anytime between November and April to sign off something called board foundations, which I'll go into some more detail in a second, and then to watch a 1 hour to 45-minute session to support the board to understand what inclusive practices look like and how they can support the young people on this program, and also their wider board as well. Because we know boards are time poor, this will be recorded and shared with everyone, so they don't have to attend the live session, very much like this one. And then we also provide a training for the mentor that sits on the board. And that we also invite that person to optional trainings. Again, we keep the mentoring session part of this very flexible because we know the time commitment from mentors on the board can vary greatly. So what happens after the 6-month program? So the idea and the huge impact that happens is mainly happening in the after of the program. And the idea is that we build young people up to, by the end of their role, to really be able to navigate uncertainty in the role. So how do we do that? We start with a foundation of understanding what the role of a trustee is and developing a resistance growth mindset to really support them to have the emotional skills, emotional intelligence to support themselves in challenging situations. And then also to have that foundation of, like, what am I doing here? What does good look like? Then that next level of supporting that board to create an accessible, inclusive placement. Some of these things are really practical things, like, for instance, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, who is the person I can go and speak to within the board? Or if I'm feeling really uncomfortable about something, who can I raise that with? Some of these things are much kind of bigger, longer term projects as well, which the board foundations support with. Again, basic knowledge of governance, these are the more harder skills. So for instance, how do you read a budget? And then learnings are applied to a placement. So what we're getting young people to do is really raise anything that they're finding that comes up as their role, and they're learning by doing. So for instance, understanding what a reserves policy is and how it relates to their organization. If that's something that comes within their board role, they can bring it to the sessions and explore that in more detail. But they're not just exploring what is going on for them as a trustee in their sessions, but they're also exploring real life case studies with 15 other people who they're going through that program with. And we find that the key learning happens through learning by doing. We find that things like charity commission documents, often people will read those documents, feel really overwhelmed, but then come back to those documents in the context of something that they're struggling with, and then that context then makes sense. So we find that when you have real life situations and case studies and apply them to knowledge or best practice, then that starts making sense. So we expose the young people to lots of different case studies. And then leading on a project in a role, like, often people tell us it takes them a while, and it takes most people a while to really get into the swing and feel comfortable of, like, what am I actually doing here, and to contribute. So by the end of this 6 months, however big or small it is, the fact that they have contributed to something gives them then the confidence to continually contribute to something. Because ultimately, serving on a board, the whole point is you're navigating uncertainty together. You will never fully know what is happening or what you're fully doing. And one of the key skills we want to equip people with is, how do you face the unknown, and how do you gather information when you don't know those know everything, and how do you manage uncertainty and risk in those situations as well. So we leave them with that confidence of being able to navigate uncertainty in their role. So what this specifically looks like in a bit more detail for the young people. So again, in October, they have that personalized onboarding. In November and January, as I said, they had that governance training. And then in February and April, they do their governance project, and then we have a celebration in May. So that's just a visual representation of that training. So yes, these 3 training things of governance basics, resistance, growth mindset, and a finance focus are those core learning modules. And then the governance project, what that looks like is we run a session which helps them identify what their governance project will be, and helps them give them a toolkit of how to think about how they might project manage it, and how they might understand the current situation within it, and how they can support their governance project to achieve the goals that are and success in a way that is helpful for the organization themselves. And that is the conversations toolkit session. You'll see in the middle, there is something called good governance with purpose, belonging, accessibility, and culture. Now that is what we call the board foundations, which is what we ask we work with the board to create. I'm going to put an example of this of an organization we worked with to create these board foundations in the chat. And what that does is it keeps the whole board centered every time on like, why are we here, what do we need to do, and how do we do it. Then we provide the next 2 months to really support them with action. We did previously have more content in these sessions, but what we learned from feedback is that the participants on the program are often time poor and they need space to action. So the way that we've designed these sessions is that they will have a minimum amount of facilitated time, and this is particularly helpful for those who are have ADHD, where they will complete what they need to do within these sessions, and they can have maximum goals. They'll have a minimum goal that they'll need to complete by the end of that 6 months. And it's important to say as well, we adapt this based on what the young person and the organization is going through. So for instance, a participant in last year's program was the chair of the board, actually, excuse me. And they really felt like, well, they went through a really challenging situation where their largest donor pulled out in the middle of the program, and the rest of the board resigned, and they were in this really tricky process. So obviously, like their governance project and what they needed to work on, all of their attention and energy needed to be on solving this problem. So we adapted these spaces and what they needed to do in this program based on that challenging situation. So just a little bit more detail of what this looks like for the whole board and how we support them in the time for way. We have this recording that people can watch if they wanted to just know what is happening. But the core thing that we ask people to watch is a 45-minute session recording on how to create inclusive spaces. Now, the live version of that is 1 hour with an actual Q&A, and that just puts the whole board on the same page. And then there is 10 minutes of a board agenda where they sign off what I've spoken about, which is these board foundations. And if the organization has a clear set of values and codified values, then this should take no time at all. Really, the reason why we have this is often, you know, people will be clear on what the charity will be clear on what the purpose of their organization is, who belongs in this space, what the culture looks like, what accessibility looks like, through doing that work of their values and having a good mission statement. But it's about bringing that into every board session and having that as a starting point. So it just really codifies what already exists. This is why it's not really a controversial thing. It doesn't take huge amounts of admin, but it's helpful to have everyone on the same page for. Then we also invite the whole board, if they want to come to that conversations toolkit training, because what this toolkit does is a facilitated way to support organization, to support trustees then apply this into every scenario they face. And the idea of this conversations toolkit is that it becomes muscle memory, or struggle with this word, where they go through it once and then it just becomes a part of the process of when you're starting a governance project like trustee recruitment, or like resetting a terms of reference for something. You do a good practice, which is, what does success look like in line with our values? So a few reflective questions in there. So we support the wider board to come to that training, but the young people themselves, they're the ones who really work through this toolkit throughout, and then they after this program they can continue to use this toolkit if they want to. But again, this is optional because we appreciate organizations are time poor, and then we invite everyone, if they want to come to our online celebration as well. Then the board mentor, how we work with them is very dependent on what works for them. We have one 90-minute training which is required to support, which they can watch the recording if they want to, and then from there on they can co-create what they want to do. And again, we invite them to these optional sessions as well. So some tips on how you can make the most of these of this program. So one is to be really honest and vulnerable. So for young people watching this, if you're not reading the board papers, for instance, there's often a lot of shame around that. And that shame is only valid if you don't care, right? You turn up to board meetings, you don't read the board papers and you're like, whatever. Like, obviously, like there's some valid guilt in that. But what we often see is, for example, young people just feeling so overwhelmed, not knowing how to prep for these board papers, just several levels of overwhelm. And they haven't prepped for this meeting in a way that works for them. And then they feel a lot of shame and guilt, and we don't want you to feel that. And in those cases, what the whole point of this is that you have a third party to talk to and be really honest with, and then we can support you to give you the tools to learn how to prepare in a way that works for you. So for instance, I'm dyslexic. It took me a long time to work out how I might prepare for board meetings and make the most of resources like listening to some of the board papers, how you skim read them, how you take your time over them, and how you can ask questions over them. So I did that alone, and that's why it took ages. However, if someone facilitated and supported me to solve that problem, it could have been done in a much shorter amount of time. So bring us all of your problems. We're here to support you, and the same goes for the board. A lot of the time we have really like wonderful board members and trustee members, and they're afraid to share like some challenges they're having. So for instance, they're like, I really get in theory why this works, but not in practice. And they're afraid to say that. But if they don't articulate any of the challenges that they're having, then it's harder to solve that problem. So for instance, this is an intimidating space. Yes, and therefore, like, I'm not sure young people can participate. Yes, and like, how can we work with you to change that? Or if it is like you've noticed people when they're reading the finance papers, or they're on the finance agenda, everyone goes quiet in the boardroom, and you're thinking like, this is a real problem. Yes, that is a real problem. And therefore, like, that needs to be solved. So bring us all your honesty, bring us all of your challenges. This is a space to change that. Also being really proactive about thinking, what problem can we solve for your board, or can the participants solve for your board, that is most helpful. So as I said, if you have a huge recruitment problem, and the young person on the program is interested in supporting with that, they can work on the trustee recruitment pack. If there is a particular policy that needs to be reviewed, they can work on that. So really bringing your big problem and using this as an opportunity, using the governance project as an opportunity to solve that. And then really like coming to the optional sessions. They are optional, but they are really helpful. And then the final thing is just really good admin support helps make this program run smoothly. So going on to that, I'll move on to the logistics section of this. So we will, as part of the onboarding in October, we will ask you a set of questions to help us to get them support the young people to get the most out of the first session in November. So that will be things like knowing where your governing document lives, knowing where particular policies live, so that we can then embed them as part of the program and reference that. A lot of our program is bringing in the theory and the what works with the practical of your organization and what that looks like. So we need some admin support from somebody within the board or a full-time member of staff, or sorry, a member of staff, I don't know what I said full-time, to support us to gather that information. So when it comes to that session, we can make the most out of that. We also then, what works really well is working with a member of staff to help us create the board foundations so that it's really simple for the board to just sign off. And then, yeah, just being available for we're available for you as well to support you identify with the young person what the most useful governance project can be. So in terms of deadlines, we have rolling deadlines for this program. The first deadline to submit the partner organization agreement, which basically sets out, do you agree to do the key requirements of the program, is by September 16th. Payments program costs £3,000 is by September 30th. We have bursary placements available. We never, ever want young people to pay for the program unless it's their employer paying for it. And we also recognize that there are small organizations and we don't want to exclude organizations just because they can't afford it. So we do have some bursary placements available, and we're trying to fundraise as much as possible in future as well to get more of those bursary placements. So if you were interested in a bursary placement, we send us your form as soon as possible, and that form a registration of interest form does not guarantee you a place, but what it does is it confirms that you are happy to sign up to some of the key requirements of the program, and to commit to some of the dates, and then we'll get back to you by September 30th if you have a place. And we also ask you to say, like, what can you contribute to the program, however big or small your budget is, as well as non-financial things you can contribute. So if you're like, no budget, I can mentor, for instance, another young person in this specific scenario, or I have a BSL that I can offer as like one service, then share whatever you can do, and then we will prioritize bursary placements based on how much we've fundraised, as well as organizational size and a number of other factors to make that a fair selection process. If you're part of the Lloyds Bank Foundation group, you do not pay for this program. It's included as part of your management support package. And you need to speak directly with your relationship manager to book this rather than us. So as I said, this year is based solely for existing young people on boards or shadow boards or on committees. Next year, depending on demand, we'll run both a mapping and placing service as well for organizations. So yeah, if you register your interest with us, we can also be in touch next year. And then we've had quite interest for people for the program this year. So if you are not successful this year, the program, yeah, we'll see if you're interested in our program next year. So that brings us to the end of the information section. Goodbye if you're listening online. This is not the end of the conversation or the onboarding with us. If you are successful in the program, we will be holding individual one-to-one calls with you all, and a tailored one-to-one onboarding with you all as well. But until now, goodbye, and thank you for watching this. I'm going to stop the recording now when I can find it. Stop recording.